Excuse me, Trish.
Hello.
Hi, it's 5 minutes after. Are you ready to begin?
Yeah, I think so. And if you could say the name Rachel, that you're going to turn the line over to Rachel. She's here with me.
Okay, to Rachel. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll transfer your lines in. Because your lines are open, anything you say can be heard over the music. One moment, please. Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During our Q&A session, you may press star 1 on your touch-tone phone if you would like to ask a question. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Rachel. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the AB 617 Community Air Grants Post First Year Learning Session, second night. My name is Rachel Paladin, and I am the Program Liaison for the Community Air Grants Program. Joining me on the phone is my colleague, Ryan Atencio. Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. This is Ryan Atencio, and I'm with the California Air Resources Board Environmental Justice team, and we are charged with implementing this program, the Community Air Grants Program. Thank you.
Additionally, I would like to remind everyone that this will be recorded and put up on our website. So if you have any subsequent questions or follow-up questions, you may watch this and last night's recording or email me at rachel.paladin, P as in Paul, A-L-L-A, T as in Tom, I, N as in Nancy, at arb.ca.gov. Additionally, if you are watching the webcast, you may email us while we're doing this webcast at sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. Ryan, would you like to give the caveat in Spanish?
Sure. Bueno, bienvenidos a este evento sobre es una sesión de aprendizaje para después del primer año sobre las subvenciones del aire en la comunidad. Bajo la ley AB 617, para ellos que ocupan asistencia en español, aquí estamos para servirles. También puedes mandar su comentario a través del correo sierrarm@calepa.ca.gov. Gracias.
And Trish, will you go to the next slide? And Ryan, will you please go over it for everybody?
Sure thing. So a little bit about this program, the background, AB 617, and the Community Air Protection Program, because the grant program goes to support this new program, and it's really a community-focused program. And so this slide is just a little bit of background and to introduce the topic of the Community Air Protection Program that CARB is running. In response to AB 617, CARB created the Community Air Protection Program. The program is about taking concrete action to reduce air pollution in overburdened communities. Recently at the September board meeting, CARB adopted the implementation plan or the blueprint, and you can find that document on our website. AB 617 requires CARB to select communities that are heavily impacted by air pollution for additional focused actions. Underlying the program's core focus on achieving emissions reductions and tracking ongoing progress is the need to address public health risks that may be caused by exposure to air pollution. A key aspect of the law and our program is a focus on community involvement and community participation. As such, all actions will be community-focused, and we aim to work with both our district partners in the various basins and our community partners as well in this regard. Additionally, the law provided for grants to community-based organizations to participate in this process, and this is the Community Air Grants Program. So that was created to provide community-based organizations in California with the logistical and technical assistance to support their efforts in participating in this program. So that's just a bit of background, again, where the Air Grants Program fits into the overall Community Air Protection Program implemented by CARB. Next slide.
So in addition to the Community Air Protection Program, there was one line in this legislation to give technical assistance, and from that we built out the Community Air Grant Program. It's California Health and Safety Code, Section 44391.2, subsection D. The state board shall provide grants to community-based organizations for technical assistance and to support community participation in the implementation of this section in Section 42705.5, which is AB 617. So the purpose of the community air grants is to provide community-based organizations in California with logistical and technical assistance to support their efforts in improving local air quality in lines with the goals of AB 617, which we will expand upon throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. So through this, we were able to figure out about 4 different eligible types of communities. The first is, of course, a community-based organization under Section 501c3 status with the IRS, but we also wanted to make it available to community-based organizations that do not have 501c3 status as of yet. So we made it so that they could partner with an organization that has 501c3 status as a sub-grantee situation. We also opened this up to Native American tribes and faith-based organizations. Next slide, please. Through this, we also had 3 different project categories or types. We saw these as fluid, but kind of gave some structure to it. The first is an informational or educational category, which was allowed to be awarded up to $50,000. The second is participatory or advocacy, up to $150,000. And the third one was technical or monitoring, which is up to $500,000. Again, it was encouraged that these categories be fluid and not just focus on one category. Next slide, please. Next, we kind of wanted to talk about scoring. So there were 7 different categories of scoring: background and project description, collaboration and leveraging, so partnerships and possible other funds that were being brought into the project, programmatic and technical alignment, concept integration, which is, of course, relating back to the previous slide, performance evaluation, and project timeline. Along with the scoring, we had a scoring, this is a scoring table, and then we also had a scoring scale. So that is actually on page 5 of 5 in Exhibit B, just to kind of give an idea, if you have that in front of you, or if you would like to look at it later, of how things were scored. Trish, would you like to say something? Okay, I talked too quickly. That's her nice way of saying that. And at this point, if anybody would like to comment on the scoring, we're open to comments on the phone or an email. Again, if you would like to comment later or through email at a later point, you're welcome to. But if anyone in the room has a comment on the scoring table, please raise your hand. No? Okay. At any point in time, you can queue up and we will pause in a couple more slides to answer all questions. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Trish. So we wanted to explain the air grant roles and responsibilities. Here we've laid out the roles for the grantee and for the California Air Resources Board. Obviously, there are more elements than just the grantee. Sometimes there are sub-grantees and contractors and consultants. And of course, here at CARB, there are many people working on your project. So it is not just the project manager. But the grantee overall, with their consultants and their staff, are required to meet the provisions of the air grant agreement. So that includes things like kickoff meetings to discuss the scope of work, the schedule and milestones. Although that's in the application, it's good that we have a conversation to discuss it. The terms and conditions of the grant, that of course is in the contract, but it's good to make sure that we have a mutual understanding of what is required. Project reporting, insurance requirements, and board resolutions, which are also required in the terms and conditions. CARB's role is to oversee and administer the air grant program and each project. So that means to administer grant to ensure provisions of agreements are met, So we make sure that we work with you to make so that you are meeting the requirements. Provide guidance to grantees, which sometimes includes helping with monitoring and and reporting. Project reporting per the funding guidelines for agencies that administer California climate investments. Because these funds are under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we have additional requirements, so we have additional reporting. And of course, and to ensure all program requirements are met. Next slide, please. So our anticipated schedule for the next round of funding is starting right now, well, as of yesterday. Right now we are working on doing public meetings and working on a public process. That will lead into our next phase, which is the draft guidelines for a 30-day public comment period starting in winter 2019, so early next year. Everything that is said today and leading up to that will inform the next year's draft guidelines, and then everything said in those first 30 days will inform the final guidelines. We anticipate the solicitation to start in late winter, early spring of 2019. I received questions about that last night to see how exactly when we're thinking. It will probably be around the same time as last year, but I'm hoping for the earlier the better, so wish me luck. And then the project selection will be in summer 2019. We will be, hopefully, the plan is to have a 3-month solicitation period, so we're pushing back the actual review process a little bit more from last year. And next slide, please. So these are the dialogue questions we have. As I said, I would love to hear comments about scoring and any other things beyond these questions, but I will run through them quickly, not too quickly, but hopefully you have them in front of you. And we want to hear more than just this. These are just probing questions. So the first question is, what were some difficulties while filling out your application, and what were some useful aspects? We understand that obviously there were going to be difficulties, but we would like to expand upon the positives as well. Do you feel that your project was in line with the goals of AB 617? And what clarification should be used going forward on the goals? We understand that we want you to have it in line with the goals of AB 617, but maybe those weren't very clear, and you would like to be able to address that more clearly in your application. And the third is, how can we improve the application process as a whole? Not just the solicitation, but the time and the calls and the questions as they were answered. The fourth is, explain your understanding of the purpose of the community air grants. So that kind of goes back to the goals. The fifth is, what would you like to see funded in support of AB 617? So what types of projects? And which type of grant process is most accessible for you? There are many different types of grant processes. We've been kind of doing some research, but we know that other people have already experienced those different processes, so we'd like to hear your feedback on that. And lastly, how did you hear about the program? Did you hear about it through social media, possibly through a friend of a friend, a community-based organization, an air district, or other? We would like to make sure that we expand in our outreach and communication to everyone. So with that, okay, we're going to have the operator give a prompt to everybody on the line, and then we're open to questions in the room as well after that.
If you would like to ask a question on the phone lines, please press *1 and record your name when prompted. Please make sure your phone is not muted when you record your name. Once again, that's *1. One moment for our first question.
Additionally, as a reminder, you can email your questions in to sierra.rm@calepa.ca.gov.
And currently no questions have come in on the phone lines.
Hey, Rach. This is Ryan Atencio again down here in El Monte. I just wanted to chime in. Can you hear me in the room?
Yes, we can.
Sure, okay. So just to remind the folks on the conference line and also in the room or when folks watching the webcast, this is the beginning of the public process. We anticipate, we're holding these two events back to back here at a time where it's at 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. presenting the same information at both events and archiving both events. So if you didn't happen to catch yesterday's, it's archived. So there's that part of it I just wanted to reiterate. Don't feel like you missed something, and you can always catch that archive session. And then all of these events that we're doing now or that we're going to be implementing or doing here in early next year are leading toward releasing the draft guidelines, and that's a major difference than what we saw last year with the first round of these grants, this new program. Last year, the first round, there was kind of an accelerated schedule. Of course, that's all of AB 617 has a very accelerated and aggressive schedule. So we wanted to try to match that in the grants program, this community grants piece, to get the funding out through these projects as aggressively as we could. So this year, the difference is we're focusing more on informing the final solicitation and what the guidelines look like. So we're having I guess we're having a public process leading up to releasing the draft guidelines, right? And so there'll be more opportunity to comment at other events, and then also on the draft document, which is something that we've seen here from other programs at CARB, and we know folks are accustomed to having that opportunity for input, so we wanted to be able to provide that. So again, this is just kind of the first step in the process, eventually leading toward the ultimate, publication and release of the guidelines for round 2 of the AIR grants.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Park, and I'm the Environmental Justice Program Manager at Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Stockton. I'm probably going to talk a lot, so I apologize ahead of time. But I wanted to start by asking, and I apologize for coming in late, we got stuck in some traffic. But I wanted to start by asking, what did CARB discover were some best practices? Because in looking at the PowerPoint that was provided, I didn't see what did we learn and part of it. So I was wondering if that had been said already and I just missed it, or if that wasn't yet discussed.
We wanted to make sure that this was a learning session from you, and we've learned a lot, but I think one of the reasons we didn't include that in the presentation, and again, maybe we should have, is that we've heard a lot of feedback already, but we'd like to get it on paper from you. I don't want to infer that this was a good thing that we did or this is a bad thing that we did, especially with the amount of people who didn't receive. In fact, maybe I should go over that for everybody in the room. I know you, Yoli, do know, but we had 65 applications, and we were oversubscribed by almost 400,000%, or 400,000, so 4 times as much. And we increased the amount of money that we were using for these grants from 5 million to 10 million, and that still wasn't able to capture a lot of things. So that's probably why we haven't included that, and I'd like your suggestions on what you think best practices might be. Yesterday, one of the biggest themes that we heard was you need to make sure that you give projects of all 3 categorical types. They weren't, it's fluid, but it definitely ended up favoring larger projects. So out of best practices, that's one thing I can say. We need to address that. But other than that, I'm pretty open. And of course, a longer time frame. We didn't have the solicitation open long enough, which is one thing we're trying to address in this way, especially with the 30-day comment period. But that's all we have at the moment. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh. I don't know if at the moment I do. Well, I don't know. Maybe it'll come out as we discuss more. So kind of going through these dialogue questions a little. So like especially the first question, what were some of the difficulties while filling it out? For me, this was the first time filling out this or applying for this type of grant. I've written grant applications for other types, but this one was a new one for me. And so my difficulty was obviously not having prior experience, but also the question seemed very repetitive. And it was really difficult to understand why it was repetitive, and I didn't know if that meant that each page was going to go to somebody else, and so they needed to have some background so that they could get the whole story, or if it was just my not understanding the questions themselves. So I think if the questions could be, it was frustrating actually. So if the questions could be made in such a way as to not have to repeat the same content in new ways, I guess. Yes, of course, we think that the project was in line with the goals, so I don't think that was an issue. How can the application
Yoli, wait a sec, because they can't hear you on the webcast. It's okay.
Thank you. Okay, it's blinking. So yeah, for how maybe it could be improved, I don't know if this is possible, but if it is, to provide like a third-party neutral grant technical assistance, somebody who I can go to and say, am I on the right track with this? Because if I don't have experience and my colleagues or those who, in the same agency, same program as me also don't have experience, it's hard to know if I'm writing it the way that I should be. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Can I go back to, unless, of course, if anybody else would like to chime in, please raise your hand. I know Yoli has a lot to say, and if there's anyone on the line, please let us know periodically. But I would like to ask you, what kind of grants have you applied to, like that were different, and how were they different? Because that's actually kind of jumping to question number 5, but I think they're connected.
Yeah, primarily we're funded by private grants. And so private grants, endowment grants, those, again, limited experience, but in the ones that I have, it's a whole lot simpler process. It's very basic, easy to understand questions, and it's very to the point and straightforward questions. There's also not as many steps to fill out as there was with this one, and I'm sure too there's a major difference between like a government grant application and private grant application. So I understand that, but those are the differences, right?
Would you be willing to send me a couple of examples of other grants that you've applied to?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Hey, Rachel, this is Ryan again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sure. I just wanted to chime in again. So thanks, Yoli, for your comments and commentary. I think I caught most of it. There was a little bit of a delay on the phone line. So for those that if they were disconnected or something like this, where I think everyone should be back on and able to listen. So I just wanted to get to some parts of your comment regarding, I think I heard about the application. The questions were competitive, and it was that part was confusing. It sounded like, and so part of the process or the thinking that went into designing that application was our desire to elicit information about the community-based organization itself. So the Health and Safety Code was very explicit that these grants go to community-based organizations to participate in the process of AB 617. So the part of where the funding should go was explicit. And so the other parts were, there was a lot there that we were looking to also create and design and build a responsive program around that charge. But the very explicit piece was community-based organization. And so a lot of what we were doing was trying to get as much information as we could in order to ensure that this project would be implemented or ensure that the funding would go to build the capacity of and be used by a community-based organization in line with Health and Safety Code. And so it was a new program, and it had never been done before in that way and under that charge, direct charge, and from statute. So that was a challenge, but I think what we saw in the application was, again, our efforts to do that. So, for instance, when we in the application, last year's application, when we see things like describe. I think we said describe the history of your organization. Tell us about, and then we said tell us about your organization. Tell us about your connection to the community. Concrete examples of your organization representing or advocating for your community. And so we needed to make sure we were focusing as much as we could on community-based organizations in order to meet our obligation under the statute. For which there was really no previous pathway that we could find to do that. And so I think that's why you probably saw a lot of maybe similar type questions or redundant questions, but we were trying to really cover that piece to make sure we were in fact dealing with community-based organizations, in that community, and this funding would be building the capacity of that organization to participate in the process in that community that the project was proposing to serve. So that's just an explanation. It's not an excuse, but it's kind of where we were coming from. And I think with commentary like yours and others that we've been hearing so far, and that we've been hearing since the close of the solicitation, I think we might devise some new ways to do that and make sure that, in fact, we're getting this funding to community-based organizations, in line with what the statute obligates us to do.
I'd like to say, Yoli, we do hear you, and we will work on being less repetitive, and hopefully you can comment on our draft solicitation as well.
Sure, and I know this is a first-time process. I mean, I have no truck, with anybody or in and of itself. But I do want to comment real quick that the background questions were fine, because I totally understand that folks won't always know who the applicant is. I think the frustration was more of constantly having to say what it is we planned on doing, like the project itself.
We understand. And you're welcome to go. Does anybody else in the room have any comments on the phone?
I think we have 2 emailed comments. If you wanted to add something to the conversation on this piece, and then we can
go back to Yoli when she'd like. Trish, Ryan, I don't have them in front of me, so.
Okay, there's two, so I'll start. First question is, what tips or guidelines would you give in the process of defining a community, population size, census tract, geography, etc.? And so one of the things that this program was aiming to do was to fund these projects in disadvantaged communities under SB 535, low-income communities under AB 1550, and or low-income communities within a half mile of these type of communities. So collectively refer to those three types of communities as priority populations forward, in terms of like the California Climate Investments Program. So one tool that could come in handy, and in fact has come in handy, is the map based on OEHA's Calenviro screen. CARB has taken that map and then they have overlaid some of these census tract maps showing these SB 535, AB 1550 priority populations. And that's pretty useful because you can see where your community lies in terms of those definitions, and that could help inform things that you would like to do in your project. And in fact, it helps inform us on our end when we're evaluating projects, and then also when we're reporting on projects and when we're reporting on these investments, right? And that to me is a great tool, and that's on CARB's website, and it's actually under the auction proceeds part of CARB's website. We can put a link. Probably we can add a link to our web page, or Rachel can send a link to this commenter. We have their information. Although we read the comments as anonymous, we have this information, this person's contact info. But that is a helpful map, and it's under the auction proceeds pages. It's called Priority Population Investments. And so that's one very, very helpful tool that I would suggest folks use.
Ryan, this is Rachel. Can you repeat the question? I just want to
Sure.
make sure we captured it all.
Yeah, just a minute. What tips or guidelines would you give in the process of defining a community, population size, census tract, geography, etc.?
I see. I just wanted to know, there is no legal definition of a community, so we can't give perfect tips. I think, Ryan, what you said is fantastic. But we aren't looking at a certain population size. We are not looking at a certain definition of community. We have some projects that span the entire Central Valley. We have one project that spans from the lower Central Valley into the eastern Coachella Valley. So that is not a requirement to define the population or the size of the community.
Yeah, I did just want to clarify in the, as part of our data gathering process in the application, we asked about, where would the project be located in a community description and narrative on those issues. So Rachel is referring to projects that might be implemented in discrete communities in a region, right? And so, like she referenced the region of San Joaquin, there is a project that actually is focusing on that region, but within that region, there's discrete communities and community focused projects being done in communities, and so that's really what we're after, again, because this is aiming to lift up and build the capacity in communities. And so even in that example, right, let's say your project wants to cover several communities in a region, you still can use the Priority Population Investments map to see, at the census tract level, on a census tract basis, information on those communities. And so that's it's important to get this down to that level of focus. So Rachel's right. It's not our place to define your community. It's really the folks that know their communities best and the advocates in those communities to be able, and the organizations in those communities to tell us what works best for them. And so that's kind of what we were doing, and I think that's what Rachel was referring to. But even on those regional projects, again, those are being implemented at discrete communities, not necessarily covering an entire region.
I'd like you all to take a look at your screen right now. Trish is demonstrating the CCI website for us, well, the CCI part of ARB's website. There are additional tools. If you would like to contact me, I can send you lots of links and lots of documents to help you. And my email address is rachel.palatin@arb.ca.gov.
Rachel, we had another emailed question.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and read that off. What is the money? What is the funding that is going to be available to the community? Last year, there was $5 million given to the community versus $250 million. What is the current status? So I think this commenter is referring to when they say $5 million versus $250 million. I think they were referring to the $250 million that was directed to the air districts. And then the $5 million that was allocated for the air grant program. So that was last year. Of course, last year we were oversubscribed, and so we were able to basically double the amount of funded projects to $10 million. This year there was $5 million. So 2018, 2019, round 2 of the air grants, $5 million available. And I think this year the district amount. I would need to double check. I don't want to give any accurate information, but I think it's around $245 million, I believe, something like that.
Trish, do we have any callers on the line? No? And no more emails? Okay. Again, the email address is sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. And hit *1 if you would like to put yourself into the queue. Are there any other questions or comments in the audience? Okay. Would you like to continue talking? Honestly, conversation's important. Maybe our conversation can inspire. I'm speaking to Yolanda again, but maybe the conversation that we're having might inspire other questions. I really hope that people feel comfortable in chiming in. Yes, yes. Oh, we have to give you a microphone so people online could hear. Oh. And can you please state your name?
Sure. My name is Simeon Gant, and I'm here representing 2 organizations, the California Black Health Network and a community-based nonprofit called Green Technical Education and Employment. We're new to this particular process for this grant opportunity, so I'm asking a lot of questions that may have already been discussed.
Okay.
So sorry that I'm late.
That's okay.
But I am curious to know as to when the next round actually starts. It sounds like you're creating guidelines for the next round.
So I meant to try to give you a presentation. I apologize. I didn't want to jump away from the screen, but it's on the present slide deck. So it is, and we have somebody running you a copy right now, but I'll go over it anyway. So right now we're starting the public process as of yesterday to get feedback on last year. And then we're going to use that feedback from last year to develop draft guidelines for next year. And then we'll have that open for 30 days, hopefully in the month of January, for public comment. And then we will start the solicitation hopefully about mid to late February for the next round. So keep an eye on our emails, keep an eye on our webpage. We will hopefully be having another couple of meetings for input, but definitely have the draft guidelines out early next year.
Okay. And there was discussion about whether there's 10 million or 5 million or 250.
Okay. So it is quite confusing. So there are 2 programs under AB 617. One is the Community Air Protection Program, and that was $250 million last year that went through the districts to help community air monitoring. This program was initially $5 million, but was oversubscribed, so we increased it to $10 million, and it is technical assistance directly to community-based organizations. The next year will be $5 million.
Guidelines will be 5 million. Okay. All right. And on the website, does it show what type of projects were funded last time?
Yes, we have, not everything has been executed, so it is still the proposed awardees. Most of the projects have been executed, though. So if you go to our website, it's actually part of the archived part because we're going towards the next round. But Trish is showing you right now. If you go to the Community Air Grant Program, which is under the Community Air Protection Program, I could also send you a link to all of this if you'd like. We have it archived under that. It's the bottom of the page, and it's the proposed awardees, which is a total of 28 projects. And we had a majority of them were monitoring, some were participatory, and then one project was informational. That's, yeah, that little link. I apologize, I'm working on trying to make the website a little bit more user-friendly.
When you say informational, is that like convening to outreach?
So if you go to the third page of the slide deck, the first slide on that page, informational is more like educational, informational. Participatory is participatory advocacy, and technical is monitoring. These are fluid categories, however. Most, even informational projects, were also participatory. So it just kind of put a cap on how much money each project could get. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you don't have to hand it back. Any emails? No? Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you.
Are we on question 3? Is that what we were kind of talking about? How can we improve the application process?
Oh, yeah, I think we went over that already.
Okay.
So, but I wanted to ask, for the scoring part of it, I could be wrong, but in looking at the proposed awardees list, it seemed like a lot of the awardees were like the 500,000 level, that kind of technical assistance level. And
Yes.
so I was wondering, for this next round, is it kind of going to balance out? Because I'm thinking if there's a lot of, you know, small organizations who don't have the same leverageability with partners and whatnot, and who are trying to get this, if they're able to compete effectively.
So we heard this feedback as well last night. It was skewed. We recognize that. And hoping that we didn't have just monitoring or just participatory, we tried to make it so that concept integration was very important. However, as you saw, there weren't as many smaller projects. So we're looking into different ways to address that. We've heard some feedback on creating a bin system, so allocating this much for these types of projects, this much for that type of project, and so on. We're open to ideas, but we are looking into addressing that issue. Thank you. Does anybody have any thoughts on possible solutions to that, as that has been one of the biggest comments? Okay, well, if anybody has ideas, please give me an email or call, of course. Ryan, actually, I have a question for you. The second half of question number 5 asks, which type of grant process is most accessible for you? I know you've done a little bit more research on different types of grant processes, so could you maybe speak and explain a little bit more on that?
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, again, when we were looking at our kind of obligation under Health and Safety Code, this time last year and before, after AB 617 had passed, and we kind of realized, that this was an obligation we had to live up to. We started looking at granting programs, environmental justice granting programs. We looked at programs like Cal EPA Small Grants Program, which just opened up yesterday, by the way, so I'll plug that program. You can find more information at Cal EPA's website. It's a great program. We looked at programs like US EPA's EJ granting program. So there was other various programs that we were kind of looking at. There was there is examples out there for granting environmental justice communities. There was nothing. Obviously, there was nothing specifically related to AB 617 because that was new. Focusing on toxic air contaminants and criteria pollutants. So that's the key, I think, difference is the fact that we needed to, by statute, we needed to focus this work that we wanted to grant on toxics and criteria or pollutants. And so last year's guidelines, mentioned that, and we talked about that, and the idea that we had was to be able to support communities to participate in the AB 61 process and build their capacity to become partners with government to identify, evaluate, and ultimately reduce air pollution and exposure to harmful emissions in their communities. So identify, evaluate, and ultimately reduce air pollution and exposure to these emissions in their communities. So that can take many forms, many forms, and we saw a wide variety of project proposals. But all of these were, like, if you look at the granting programs we were looking at, there was a spectrum. There was very targeted and prescriptive type of programs. You will do your project must do X, Y, Z, and it's very prescriptive. And then there was other programs that were a little more on the other end of the spectrum, responsive. And so the responsive part is the program being responsive to the applicant, meeting the applicant where they're at, trying to make it accessible to the applicant. So, for instance, if you look at the conceptual categories, the gentleman was mentioning informational, and the audience there's these three kind of bins. You mentioned bins, Rachel: informational, participatory, and technical. So these are conceptual categories, and we listed, concepts, and we listed projects that go along with those concepts. But these were all examples. They weren't prescribing exactly what an applicant had to do, because we didn't know what would work best in every community in the state of California. Communities know what works best in their community, right? These advocates know their constituencies far better than we ever could. We recognize that, and so that is why these categories and concepts were so flexible. That was our attempt to be responsive in order to open this up. And sure enough, we saw, a lot of different proposals and types and projects, a wide variety out of the 65 that applied last round. So that's one of the parts that we're looking at. Do we need to be more prescriptive? And now that the program, the Community Air Protection Program, has 1 year under its belt, there's a maturity level in that program. We have the blueprint. We've selected communities at the board based on staff, the staff report. I mean, districts are doing so much work in their basins that have selected communities in them, and so maybe there's room to be a little more prescriptive to help get this funding to where it needs to go to support the participation in this process that has been maturing in order to help identify, evaluate, and ultimately reduce air pollution and exposure to these emissions in these communities. So that's a little bit of the thinking going into creating these draft guidelines again, and I think you'll see that, and then you'll be able to comment on that and tell us what you think of what we're proposing, and if you have any suggestions or commentary. So that's a little bit on that question.
Ryan, I would like to just clarify, I wasn't saying that they are bins. It has been suggested that we can create bins. And it has also been suggested that we might change the category types. I have heard that informational and participatory seem kind of like the same thing. As soon as somebody is educated, they might want to advocate on their own behalf. So that is another question that I think we should ask. Not just what type of grant process, but what type of categories would work best for your community, because maybe that doesn't make sense. And especially if we're creating a bin process, would it make sense to have the 3 separate categories or 2, or what would work best for people? So the process and the categories are my question to you all. And again, oh yes, go ahead.
Might want to fund.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. I think it's a little easier if there's a group of examples of what you're considering funding. This isn't bad, right? I think it's a good start. And I know you don't want to say, okay, we'll do this and we'll fund you. We don't want to do that. But it's a little easier when folks can kind of get a sense for what you're looking for.
Do you think it'd be helpful to include some of the projects that we're funding this year? So, like, as an example, this project was funded in previous round?
Yeah, that type of thing. That's why I was asking earlier, so to see what you actually funded. It kind of helps give a sense for looking for. But even in that, once you've looked at, determined by the ones that you already funded, then maybe you can change your categories based on that.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, no, of course. I think a thought I have is also we are still open. These categories are conceptual, so we're open to new ideas. And in fact, one of our staff here is about to speak, so he might speak on this. But we're open to the innovative ideas of the public. We don't want to tell people exactly what to do, because often people are more creative than the people who are reviewing. No offense to the reviewers, but Earl, would you like to speak? Oh, it's off. Got it?
This is Earl Withycombe with the Planning Division in the Air Resources Board. There's a great deal of confusion and uncertainty, both among community groups who are applying for 617 community air grants, steering committees composed of local advocates in EJ communities designated for state planning and or monitoring grants, and even uncertainty within the ranks of smaller air district staff who are attempting to devise a roadmap to recommend to community groups. And I listened to a member of the steering committee in Imperial County today talk about the first meeting and the level of uncertainty in everybody's mind about what was possible, what was doable, what was the best approach. And I think we should be thinking about and taking a look at some of the other models that have been developed by government agencies outside of the environmental field to help educate the public on very complex topics. And let me give one example. When the Affordable Care Act was passed by the United States government, the federal government and states recognized that people would have, who were potential applicants for health care policies, would have a great deal of difficulty navigating the regulations and the application process. And they earmarked federal grant funds that were passed down to states that states used to train a cadre of ambassadors, people who were given limited training over a 2-week period, for instance, who had prior experience in the healthcare field and understood the basic structure and the terms, to be able to counsel individuals. And these folks were then paid a stipend and worked essentially part-time mostly to help people navigate this new complex healthcare insurance program. And I'm thinking also of the example of several of the larger air districts, and I can think of one of the San Joaquin Valley Unified Air Pollution Control District and South Coast, AQMD, who train and certify technical folks on the intricacies of their regulations that apply to industrial sources, and then require, for example, or provide incentives to have industry use those folks to make sure that their applications address all of the pertinent pieces of the applicable regulations and encourage industrial facilities making applications for air permits to engage and utilize the services of these trained and vetted, certified people. And I'm beginning to wonder, given all of the programs that are being funded and the vast amounts of money that are going through the climate incentive programs, whether it might be helpful for state agencies like the Air Resources Board to have a similar program, train a cadre of folks in what's doable, what's available, what is capable in the monitoring programs that we're giving grants for, the community air grants, 617 designated areas for study and or monitoring, to as sort of independent consultants to work with community groups and advise in case where it's needed. Also the air districts that don't have the level of sophistication of the Bay areas, the San Joaquin Valleys and the South Coast districts. That's a suggestion. I do have a follow-up question that is raised now by two speakers here in the room, and it's one that I've heard an answer to a year ago, but it still puzzles me. Why are the applications that were, the 65 applications that were filed last year, maintained in confidentiality when, as a program, we espouse transparency?
The answer to that is our legal department did not want us to share all the applications. There is still conversation on whether we can and will, and if we will share all or just the ones that were awarded. We're working on it still, though. We do want to share information. We see the value in sharing the applications, especially those that were awarded, so that those who were not awarded might be able to learn some good practices, but we're finding difficulty getting that done. That's not the answer I want to give, but it is the answer. And I don't know if I'm the correct person, but maybe Trish or Ryan, could you guys explain what the steering committees are and how they relate to our program? I know that our program helps fund some people's participation in the steering committees, but the steering committees actually fall under the Community Air Protection Program and not under the Community Air Grants. So Trish or Ryan, would either of you like to chime in?
Yeah, Rachel, I can chime in. But first, I just want to make a comment. Thanks, Earl, again for your commentary. Earl was, for those that might not know, Earl was part of the team that actually helped process a lot of the applications, actually processed the applications in the first round. So thank you, Earl. And there's a lot surrounding the applications. Personally identifiable information, things like that. So we're aware of that, and we're working on that, Earl. So thank you. But regarding the community steering committees, and so again, this Air Grants program is to support. Our intention is to, number one, meet the intent of the statute, which is fund community-based organizations in order for them to participate in the process, the AB 617 process. That's our number one obligation. Number two, but all of that goes toward supporting the OCAP program at CARB, the Office of Community Air Protection. So the Office of Community Air Protection just finalized their guiding document, the blueprint, in September. And under the blueprint, that document describes the implementation process that districts will be following, and for communities that are selected in different basins under the process, et cetera. So part of that process, it's all described in the blueprint, and we're not, we weren't the authors, and we're not, this program wasn't the authors, but we work to support them in that program. And so I just wanted to make that distinction. But under the blueprint, under that process, in selected communities, districts are to create these community-led steering committees, and so there's 10 or there's however many selected communities there are here under the 617 program. The first year, I think there's something like 10 or something like this. That correlates to there's 10 steering committees in those that are in those communities, and so there's these steering committees bring together the community and government and other stakeholders and practitioners surrounding air quality in that community. And so that's a little bit on the steering committee. And so what we were trying to do, and I think what you actually see in practice, and you do see this, is that for those community-based organizations that their project was funded in what happened to be, in what turned out to be a selected community, they're they're able to use those funds to participate in the steering committee. Of course, our projects were selected for funding in I think summer of this past year. So this was before the final selection, right? And so it turns out that I think there's air grants in I think 8 of the 10 selected communities, and so those projects are able to use funding to do things like support their participation in the steering committee. If they are involved in it, and to the extent that they want to be, at the table, or have volunteered or are on that committee. But that is that organization's choice, and so to the extent that they are amenable, we provided a pathway for them to use this resource to participate in the process in that fashion through the community steering committee. But the air grants are not mutually exclusive to selected communities, because there's communities all across the state and all the basins that have issues that we wanted to raise up, and that we wanted to support these communities. And so just because you're not in a selected community, for instance, you're not one of those selected, that doesn't exclude you from being eligible from this resource. But if you are in that selected communities, you can definitely use this resource to participate in that way if you choose.
So to put that very simply, some of the air grantees happen to end up being in these communities selected under the CAP program, and therefore they use some of their advocacy or participatory dollars to participate in that public process, but they are not exclusively for that public process, and people who are not in those communities probably will not use it for that. probably more of a local or statewide advocacy. Are there any questions on that? I know yesterday we didn't explain the difference as much, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands.
If you do have a question on the phone lines, please press star 1 and record your name when prompted. Once again, that's star 1 and record your name. Thank you.
Okay, as it gets quieter and we just explain more things, you are all, oh, you have another question, Yola?
Sorry.
I asked her to come with a lot of questions, so it's my fault, everyone.
Took you up on it, definitely. So just real quick, for number 5, right, which type of grant process is most accessible for you? Correct me if I'm wrong, for the last process, there wasn't an online portal that you could apply, right? It was mail-in?
It was mail-in, yes.
Okay, because that's another process that's very accessible is online portals that you can apply through.
So like an entire application online?
Yes.
I don't know if that will be, we're just working on the website. As I mentioned earlier, my website, our page itself is slowly evolving, but that is something that we will look at in the future. We are also slowly working towards possibly having, allowing things scanned in more, because as it stands, we required everything to be wet signature to me personally. And that also reminds me that we did not mention something that we are thinking about. We are thinking about possibly putting the date, instead of the posted by that date, that we receive it by that date. And that will be probably something that we'll look at. And I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts on that. Is that bothersome or is it doable?
As in, like, it has to be given to you before the
Like
deadline?
I need it on the deadline instead of I need it postmarked on the deadline.
Well, technically speaking, postmarked by is a lot easier. If you don't have a lot of help on it and it takes you a long time to do it, then it's easier to have a postmarked by.
Yeah.
If you're working all nighters.
Which is why because we had a shorter time frame, but
Right.
3 months to work on it, does that seem a little bit easier to have it delivered to me by a date? Yes, I'm getting nods. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And to comment on that about why it's that makes it easier is because, of course, at the same time, a lot of folks are applying to other grants as well. And
Yes.
so if they're having to do it parallel, then just, you know.
And I think honestly we've had some mailing issues ourselves, where we'll mail something and it takes a long time or we don't receive it, so we understand. I just wanted to throw that out there as something we're thinking about to continue the conversation. For one example, we sent something out and you can't send it out by anything by USPS, so that took a lot longer than other communities, so we understand.
This is Trish Johnson, and thank you for your comments, Yolanda. It makes me think about other programs where we have transitioned from hard copy to electronic. So some of our reporting programs, if you watched our board hearing last week, we talked about the criteria pollutant and toxics regulation. And I know that has come a long way in recent years, especially as it relates to this program. But also I was thinking about actually on our end having to put together some of the documents that are online, like the project summaries. And so we would really appreciate electronic if that's possible, since that took quite a bit of time to translate the information from hard copy onto something we could use online.
She's looking at me and smiling because I do the web stuff, and they had to do the typing. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, Trish. I just had to upload it and fix the table, which still, well, We have a lot of technology issues that we're working on. We'll talk to legal about that, though. Any other ideas or comments from my colleagues?
I just had a question whether or not, as a CBO, you guys thought that we gave you enough time and enough notice regarding the community air grants, and whether or not we utilized all of the platforms we could have in getting the word out.
I think there were some groups that they're just on top of it, and so they had enough time. For us smaller groups that don't have a lot of capacity, we didn't know. I think we found out like within a month of the due date, and so it was a crunch to get it out. But it is more difficult for smaller groups to have eyes on it, on those opportunities, because we're all focused on multiple things at once.
Does anybody have any suggestions on how we can get our information out? I think this is one of our questions, but for example, we could have done better on promoting this meeting. I will admit that fully, but we did put out an email blast, and that brought some people in. Is there another way we can reach people? Obviously, we can utilize Twitter more, other aspects of social media, but are there any community meetings in your area that we can come to? Obviously, you don't need to say that right now. You can email me, but I'm open to suggestion.
I think if it's possible I don't know if this is like on the application or something, but to have a spot that says, can we keep track of your name and organization and email? And then you build a list of the applicants, whether or not they were awarded, so that when the next round comes out, you have a list already that you can immediately send out to.
Thank you. And I would like to know, is everyone here following CARB on Twitter? No? Yes? Okay. That's our main outlet for social media. But if we need to be utilizing other ones, maybe that's a good idea.
Do you also have like a little blurb about it when it opens on YouTube as well, like a 4 or 5 minute promo video?
But we should probably do that.
Way as well.
Yeah, YouTube. I use YouTube more than I use Twitter. I'm not going to lie.
We also have a CARB EJ blog, and we will make sure that we utilize that a lot more from here on out.
We will be doing a recap on this on our CARB EJ blog.
Is there a CARB Instagram account as well?
No.
So if that would be another way as well. And the cool thing too, of course, about Instagram is because it's photo-based, you can also kind of do see how they are, see how they're progressing.
Yeah, we're hoping with this round of grants and the next round to do more press-related events and really get into the community and show the progress that they've made. And we're also working on, Ryan? Thought I heard something, I apologize. We're also working on just continuing to be transparent, but allowing other groups at ARB to show their content, so there'll be more of a collaborative message as time goes on.
Yeah, and it'll give communities an opportunity to share their progress with CARB as well.
Trish?
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Yolanda? Earlier you mentioned building a list, which we have done with email addresses for all of our 65 applicants, at least the main person identified on the application. And so I wanted to know if you meant by email or hard copy or phone call or all options. I actually wanted to find out what you recommend as far as building that list, but then how we utilize it and by what means.
Email, certainly. And I do think a phone call often helps as well, especially for those like me get 2,000 emails in their inbox. Having a follow-up call helps as well, especially if you CARB staff have already built that relationship with us community groups.
Are there any people on the line?
Hey, Rachel, this is Ryan. There was a question via email,
Okay.
and so I'll go ahead and... I'm sorry?
I said go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question, so I'll summarize it. Actually, a comment. So this commenter is saying to give preference or a higher score to projects that began with low-cost monitoring for 6 months to measure a wider range of pollutants, and including things like VOCs, and then in the next 6 months use higher cost sensors and conduct health studies. So thank you for that's getting to a great point. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you for sharing, Ryan.
I don't know if it's possible to follow up with the person who asked, but my follow-up question to that would be, are they asking to prioritize communities who, say, have purple air monitors, for example, and are kind of doing their own monitoring to begin with, and then use the grant to get like higher quality? I don't know.
So I have spoken to this person before, and I believe that the comment was saying to start out to use lower cost ones to figure out which pollutants are strongest in that area, and then move on to more focused monitoring.
Is that prior to applying for the grant, like have already built that foundation, or to use the grant for that?
They were saying to use the grant for that, but that could be a possibility as well.
Okay, I see.
I mean, I'll write that down.
This commenter also had a question, which we could probably refer to someone in our monitoring and lab division. But the question, and I don't know if we can answer it here, but the question was: are there any air pollution experts using smaller portable equipment to collect dust samples for determination of composition? And so I think that's probably something Rachel and I can get back to this commenter on.
Yes, we will do that. So at this time, it's quiet in the room. I will sit here and be here until 7:30 p.m. If you have questions for us, please hit *1 if you're on the phone. Please email your questions to sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. Thank you, and I will be patient. For those of you still listening, we have 30 more minutes. So if you have questions, please click *1 on the phone or email at sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. I'm going to take this moment to reread the dialogue questions and also to urge those on the line to look at the scoring scale and the scoring table. And if you have any questions or comments on that part, please let us know. Number 1, what were some difficulties while filling out your application? What were some useful aspects? Number 2, do you feel that your project was in line with the goals of AB 617? And do you need clarification on what we should use going forward to explain those goals? Number 3, how can we improve the application process as a whole, including how you apply, questions, how we respond? Number 4, explain your understanding of the purpose of the community air grants. What do you envision them being used for? Number 5, what would you like to see funded in support of AB 617? So what types of projects other than your own? What type of grant process is most accessible for you? And number 6, how did you hear about the program? Thank you. I will be here until 7:30 p.m. And Brian Atencio has something to say for our Spanish speakers.
Sí, bueno, otra vez bienvenidos a esta sesión de aprendizaje sobre las subvenciones del aire en la comunidad bajo la ley AB 617. Estamos aquí para servirles si ocupas asistencia en español. También puedes mandar un correo electrónico al correo sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. Gracias.
Y también después de este video pueden mandar un mensaje por el correo airecomunitario@arb.ca.gov. Gracias. We have about 16 minutes left, and we are still available for any phone comments or email comments. If you would like to make a comment, press star 1. If you'd like to email a comment, the email address is sierra.rm@calipa.ca.gov. Additionally, if you have any comments or questions leading up to our draft comment or our draft solicitation period of 30 days, please send them to me at Rachel, RACHEL PALLATIN @arb.ca.gov. Thank you. Hi, this is Rachel Paladin once again. This is the 5-minute warning. We will be concluding this webcast at 7:30 p.m. If you have any questions, you can call in now, or rather push *1 on your phone right now. You can also email it to us at sierrarm@calipa.ca.gov. If you are unable to send your information at this time, please email me directly at Rachel, RACHEL.PALLATIN @arb.ca.gov. Thank you. The time is now 7:30 p.m. and brings us to the conclusion of our recording. This will be posted on CARB's website for future use, and you may contact me at my email, rachel.palatin@arb.ca.gov if you have any further questions or comments. Thank you for attending and have a lovely evening.
This concludes your conference, and you may disconnect. Once again, your conference has ended, and you may disconnect. Thank you for joining.